I think inclusive cities tend to have areas where you can get around them very easily. So not places that are cut off so that it's too far to be able to get somewhere, or the transport just doesn't exist to let people get to places where there's work, where they can engage culturally. So inclusive cities are not areas where you have one kind of people in one place and one kind in another, where everything is highly segregated. Often when things are segregated, that's when you get differences in the resources available to one area compared to another. But if there's more integration, you tend to have this similar level of service across a city, and that tends to bring people together because people are equally able to engage with what the city has to offer. It's going to be much more difficult in a resource-constrained future. The first thing that there will be a shortage of is money, because we're moving into the bursting of a global credit bubble. This is going to cause a period of liquidity crunch, like 2008, but much, much more so. When there's very little money circulating, that makes it hard to connect buyers and sellers, producers and consumers. So economic activity tends to freeze over. And so that makes it harder to access resources, because we can't exchange money for resources if we don't have any. Beyond financial crisis, we would be looking at problems with energy and shortages of other resources. Now, a lot of resources come from a long way away. So that depends on being able to buy them from somewhere else and maintain trading relationships. A lot of things will be in short supply because the trading relationships will break down. And other things will be in short supply because we lack the energy to be able to extract and produce them. In some ways, Sweden will be better off than a lot of other places in that regard, because you have so much in the way of hydropower, for instance, and you have nuclear plants and various other things. You've also gone further into other forms of renewable development. So the infrastructure is already here, whereas in other places they would have to build it because they haven't done it yet. And without a whole lot of money and energy up front, they won't be able to make that transition that in some ways Sweden has already made. But nevertheless, it is still going to be a constraint on energy, particularly liquid fuels, because you don't tend to produce those here. You can produce renewable power, but liquid fuels are going to be a problem for transport. So there are going to be energy constraints as well. Then it's harder for people to move around. And when you have a very spread out city, it's much harder to allow people to engage with what the city has to offer if there's a shortage of money and energy. I think cities really need to develop quite spontaneously. Throughout history, people have come for opportunity and then created something in their own image, but that can look like a mosaic, and that really is fine. I don't think a city needs to be entirely planned from the top down with some sense of what it ought to look like, what it ought to be aiming for. I think when people come together, they create something that we wouldn't necessarily have anticipated, and that can bring a lot of advantages. I look at places that have a lot of immigrants, and I look at the richness that these people bring, different potential ways to solve solutions. Some of these people have lived through all sorts of different circumstances, including resource shortages, lack of money, instability. They know how to live like that, and there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from these people. So they're not just coming here to take from what the city has to offer. They're offering something as well from their own background. And if we look at that mosaic and actually celebrate the fact that there is diversity, that can lead to a city that I think has a lot more to offer.